Hi everyone and welcome back to Knit Cat Paddywhack. I'm Kat and I share easy knitting tutorials for new knitters or people who just want something fun and easy to knit. If this interests you, please consider subscribing. I hope you enjoyed my last knit along baby blanket tutorial. I have so far done the stocking stitch cat and the stocking stitch heart. If you haven't seen them yet, I will link the videos down below. In the heart video, which was the first one, I went over in more detail about the kind of yarn that we're using and tension and that sort of thing. So that one is a really important one to jump on over and watch before you watch this one. So this week we're doing another blanket square, but it is a different style of pattern. It's this bamboo stitch rectangle. As you can see in my little graphic here of the blanket, the heart square and the cat square that we have already knit are done in the darkest shade, which I've called colour 5, which is a dark brown colour, and the lightest shade, which is a cream colour, and I've called colour 1. The square or rectangle that we're working on today is on the top row as well. It's the second from the left. I will link in the description below the written pattern for this tutorial. So if you'd like to find out how to do this very easy textured bamboo stitch rectangle, keep watching. Alright, so let's get started on this bamboo stitch rectangle. So, a few notes. So we're still using the same yarn, which is the Valuable brand yarn called Gradients, and we're just using the darkest colour, which I've called colour 5. Now you'll be using the same needles as for the other squares, so 4mm straight needles, but the tension is different. So for bamboo stitch, the tension you'll want is 22 stitches by 24 rows to make 10 centimeters squared in bamboo stitch. So I would really encourage you to do a tension swatch with your needles, just to make sure that your tension is the same as what's written for the pattern, because even if your stocking stitch works out the same, your bamboo stitch might be different and you might need to change your needle size. And if you're new to knitting and the whole idea of tension swatches and stuff is a bit confusing or is completely new to you, check my description down below. I've got a list of useful tutorials and blog posts that I've found that I'm linking to all these videos in case you need to learn a bit more about how to do a tension swatch. But for me, 4mm needles does this 22 stitches by 24 row tension. So what we're going to start off with doing is casting on 36 stitches. And I would use the same cast on that you've used for the other squares in this pattern, so I'm using a long tail cast on. So I've got my 36 stitches. And to begin with, we're just going to be knitting 2 rows in stocking stitch. So that means for our row 1 we will knit all the stitches, and for row 2 we will purl all the stitches. So this is row 1, so I'm just doing the knit stitch for all of the stitches. Now something that is a little bit unusual about this design that I'm going with is that I've decided to do a stocking stitch border, whereas a lot of blanket blocks will do a garter stitch border. And the garter stitch border is with good reason, because garter stitch doesn't curl like stocking stitch. However, I thought that a stocking stitch border might be helpful for the seaming up at the end, just to make it uniform with the intarsia squares as well. So that's why I've gone with a stocking stitch border. So row 1 is done, so we'll do row 2, which is to purl all stitches. Okay, so now we're up to row 3, and we will be doing the first 2 stitches and the last 2 stitches throughout the square in stocking stitch. So that means on all of the odd numbered rows we're going to knit these 2 stitches and these 2 stitches, and on all of the even numbered rows we're going to purl those same stitches, and in between them is where we do the bamboo stitch. So that means we've got a little bit of a border for when we sew the blanket squares together at the end. So I'll do my 2 knit stitches, and then we can start the bamboo stitch section. So bamboo stitch is very simple. It is a 2-row pattern, and the first row is a right side row, and it goes like this. So we start with just a knit 1, and then we're going to do a yarn over. So simply take the yarn, your working yarn, from the front over the top of your right hand needle, and it's just like that basically. And then we're going to knit 2 stitches, and then with this yarn over, which if we left it alone would just make a hole and would be an increased stitch, instead of that we're going to take the yarn over in our left needle and pass it over the 2 stitches that we just knit. And we're going to repeat that pattern over and over again. So yarn over, knit 2, and then pass the yarn over the 2 stitches that we knit. Now I've just worked that yarn over knit 2 pattern, and now I have 3 stitches left on my left hand needle. So I finished the bamboo stitch pattern by knitting 1, and then because these are the last 2 stitches, these are our stocking stitch border stitches, so we're just going to knit those as well. And that's your first row of bamboo stitch done. It's that simple. And the next row is even simpler because all we have to do is purl all the stitches. So now that we've worked the second row of bamboo stitch, we're just going to repeat those 2 rows over and over again. So remembering to keep our first 2 stitches and our last 2 stitches in stocking stitch. So that means on all the right side rows we're going to knit them, and on all the wrong side rows we're going to purl them. And then we'll do our row 1 of the bamboo stitch, which starts with a knit 1, and then we do our yarn over, knit 2, pass the yarn over until we get to 3 stitches left at the end, and then we knit them all. So we're going to do 52 rows of the bamboo stitch pattern, and so that's the equivalent of 26 pattern repeats if you like to think in those terms. So it's a nice little repetitive but not too boring pattern to work on, and it will be a nice contrast to the stocking stitch intarsia squares that are on either side of it. Now I've worked my 52 rows in bamboo stitch plus the 2 rows at the bottom in stocking stitch, and I've kept my 2 stitches down the sides in stocking stitch as well. So they're curling around themselves a little bit, but when we block it, they'll sit a little bit flatter. What's left to do now is just 2 more rows in stocking stitch, starting with a knit row, and then we can cast off. Time to cast off or bind off. And again, like with your other squares, make sure you're not casting off too tightly so that we don't get any bunching at the top. We want nice square lines. Now there's our knitting done on our bamboo stitch rectangle. What's left to do now is to weave in our 2 ends. And there is our 3rd blanket square done. So what we can do now is block it. There's a link down below for some instructions on how to steam block a piece. I think that steam blocking is very good for acrylic. You can also try wet blocking it. But once you've done your finishing, this piece will be ready to sew to the heart and the cat squares that we've already knitted.